I think all the affects except for a couple. This heart radical means it has something to do with thought, with thinking, with the mind. But this character here, this is actually a field. It's a field, and what makes it a field? What makes it a field? What makes it a field is you put your field in an area that would otherwise be marshy, that would otherwise be damp. You don't put your field on the side of a hill like this. You would like your field to be somewhere where there's mountains on either side of it, because it's going to have all the soil there. But it also tends to be damp. And because it tends to be damp, you have to create the system of ditches. If you've ever traveled through farmland, periodically there will be a road, and on the other side of the road there's a ditch. And it's the same thing in China. There's paths, on either side there's a ditch. A system of sluiceways. This character 10, which means field, it was also written, you also see it written like this. This character was also written like this in the Japanese. This pattern, this constant sort of pattern, reproduced through the land. One of the earliest kind of mythological stories about China is the Great Yu. The Great Yu, all he did was he drained the swamps, because China, Zhongguo, the central region, used to be this vast swamp, at least in the areas that are currently fertile. And people really couldn't eke out a living there. They were kind of constantly, even though the ground was very fertile and there was sort of plenty of things to eat, civilization couldn't really take place. And what the Great Yu did was he produced the system of canals to drain it all out and to be able to allow for an influx of water when the ground was dry that allowed civilization to take place. So this character here, this se literally means to think, and it can also mean to worry. It's like to ponder, to really kind of mull over something, to kind of hold it in your mind and think about it. So if you're ever really worried or consternated about something, that's se. However, if you're constantly stressed, about something, you're constantly thinking so hard about all these things, that will weaken your spleen. Because the spleen wants to be able to relax. It wants to work, wants to create this system, this pattern, and then once that's done, it wants to be like, okay, good, I'm done. I've created this line of antibodies, I'll just send them out into the blood, now I don't have to do anything. Now the antibodies are going to latch on to all this stuff, all these other immunocytes, they're going to glom up together and be disposed of. I've done my work and I'm done. But when the spleen is constantly working, that's when you get spleen qi deficiency. And an easy way to diagnose yourself, I guess, to see if you have spleen qi deficiency is to look in the mirror and look at your tongue. And if your tongue has sort of tooth marks on the sides, if it's scalloped, if it's flabby or kind of scalloped, the scalloping is probably the easiest thing for you to notice. That means that the spleen qi is probably deficient, that there's not enough sort of qi there to hold it there. And you will tend to get that when you're overworked, when you're stressed, when you're not getting enough sleep, when you're eating on the go, all those things. It's really kind of a picture of probably what's going on with the spleen itself. Because the spleen tends to become more dimpled and wrinkled during times of activity, when you have to actually do things. And it fills up and swells up when you're relaxed, when you can rest and digest and things like that. So this character here, this se, it's the capacity of the spleen, but it's also like the downfall of the spleen. 有意思, 意思, yi is like intention, but 意思 means to have something be interesting. 意思, that's interesting when you think about the spleen, because when, let's say you're studying something, you're reading something, it's interesting for a while. After maybe 5, 6 hours, 7, 8 hours, eventually you start to feel bored. It's no longer interesting. What's happening is your serotonin levels are starting to drop. They're kind of getting worn out as you get sleepier and sleepier as the day wears on, and your ability to stay engaged, to stay focused, to really kind of think about things decreases. Serotonin, it's in the gut, but the main repository, for serotonin in the body is in the platelets, which we talked about a little bit before when we talked about the heart. Platelets are just laden with serotonin. So the platelets are what is giving the blood its kind of thickness, giving it its viscosity. The platelets, in a way, keep the blood from leaving the blood vessels, which is one of the functions of the spleen, to contain the blood and keep the blood from pouring out, to hold and contain the blood. But it's also those platelets that contain this serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that we associate with this sense of being interested, of being engaged. I'm trying to think of a kind of an example of how that would relate to a pattern. If you've ever sat at a desk where everything is just kind of like churning all over the place, it's oftentimes more difficult to kind of focus and work on whatever it is that you're working on. Somebody has to have a very good spleen, I would think, to be able to operate in that kind of marshy environment. And sometimes if you get tired and you can't focus anymore, you may find yourself just organizing it, going through everything and organizing it, because once you do that, it's going to be a lot easier for you to focus and to think about what it is that you're doing. That's all this spleen activity of taking something that is naturally sort of chaotic or has a tendency towards chaos and putting it into an ordered form.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
So, you mentioned that the spleen produces about half the macrophages.
It contains about half the monocytes in the body. Yeah.
What is the other half localized in another complementary organ?
For the most part, there are some circulating in the blood. And like I said, the spleen is to the circulatory, what the lymph nodes are to the lymph system. The lymph nodes also contain a lot of these same cell lines, especially the B and T cells. And so lymph nodes act in a similar way. The lymph system, the spleen is sort of associated with this aspect of the circulatory system and also with immunity and whatnot, but the lymph system is more, the hexagram that's related to that is sort of the opposite hexagram. We saw the spleen is all these solid lines. The lymph system is related to this hexagram here, the receptive. And the lymph system is like, you have the blood that courses through the blood vessels, and then that, the fluids and the nutrients that are in the blood go out into the interstitial fluid, the tissue that is bathing all the cells, and then that fluid then needs to be recollected and delivered to back into the circulatory system. And it's primarily dumped here in the subclavian vein. There's a major duct there. But what happens is all of these lymph nodes, all these lymph vessels collect the fluid like they would into ditches. And as the fluid moves through those passageways, it periodically comes to a one-way valve that's housed in these monocytes and B cells and T cells that can then examine what's in the lymph fluid and see if there's maybe something that's in the tissue that needs to be taken care of. And if there is, then it will then start to produce antibodies to deal with that infection. So if you've ever had like a swollen lymph node in your neck, or if you had a bad cut or infection on your arm and your lymph nodes proximal to that infection become swollen, that's what's going on. And that's primarily what happens in when this, for instance, with mono or with malaria, where the spleen becomes very large and it ruptures. It's a similar type of story to what's going on with the lymph node. A lymph node can go from being basically impalpable, like more or less non-existent or very tiny, to as large as a golf ball if there's an active infection kind of going on and the body's trying to produce a lot of
You said that at some point iron and hemoglobin
Right.
shunted to the liver.
Right, so the basically...
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, sure. So she asked about, she said that at one point, I don't know who asked that, but she said that at one point I mentioned how the iron and the hemoglobin from these old red blood cells then is shunted to the liver. And so the spleen is here in the upper left quadrant, and then in the upper right quadrant we have the liver. The spleen's venous system, like pretty much all of the organs in the abdomen, it eventually goes to the liver. So these old red blood cells that are broken down, materials from those broken down red blood cells enters into this vein here, and that vein then goes to the liver, and the liver uses that material it stores it in the form of hemosiderin. It also attaches the iron to ferritin so it can be transported through the body. And the hemoglobin itself is broken down first into biliverdin, which is a greenish colored pigment. And that's in the gallbladder, which is what gives the bile salts their greenish color. And then from there into bilirubin. And bilirubin, of course, is the most important antioxidant in the body. It gives us the flesh kind of like this reddish yellow color. The color of the spleen, 取色, it says 在是微黄 in colors